Talk about your work at the World Bank. What you're doing. The other day, I saw you at Lehman House talking about liberalizing economies and economic freedom and stuff. So I want you to just briefly tell us what your role is as the Vice President of the World Bank.
You know, as the Vice President of the World Bank in charge of Africa, it means that I lead a team of, I have a staff strength of about 1,000, wow. 1,530 staff. But then I have consultants of about almost 2,000. So total strength is something in that neighborhood. Involved in the provision of policy advice, advisory services, financing, institutions building, partnerships, expertise, provision of expertise to countries in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, across the whole spectrum of sectors like that are necessary to build a modern economy or society. So our business of development requires that we work with governments, private sector, and increasingly now civil society to ensure that whatever development financing that we can offer to countries, when we offer them, that they are used appropriately in the sectors that are most important to enable those countries achieve economic growth. So a lot of people on the basis of that financing assume that what the World Bank is about is money. But no, the most important thing that we're about is knowledge and expertise. Being able to use what we know has worked in other countries as best practices, and to, you know, say to countries that say we have a particular problem in our health sector, what do we do to tackle the problem of infant mortality or child mortality or maternal mortality? You can say, oh, there's a country in Latin America that had precisely the same kind of problem. We have, you know, documented how they solved it. Let's see whether there are some similarities in your own challenge. That kind of a role is an important role. So for the 47 countries that I am responsible for in sub-Saharan Africa, that's what myself and my team and I, you know, offer to these countries in health, in education, in infrastructure, in agriculture, in institutions building, policy in environment, you know. So the whole investment in knowledge, in studies, in any given year we have an average of, say, 103 studies of different kinds that my team would have invested its time on. So it can be some analytical work in education sector in Guinea-Bissau, and then that would lead to some findings that would then begin to say these are the kinds of policy measures that may be necessary. The research and the studies and the whole knowledge investment enables us to get to the findings in that specific sector, on that issue, and then on the basis of the findings we can sort of say what comes out of these are the following policy measures that a government could consider. So that kind of work is important, because the difference between countries that have grown and those that have not grown is really what kind of, are you making policy on the basis of evidence, or are you making policies on the basis of in the dark, or, you know, on the basis of anecdotes? You can just think that, oh, it would be a good thing to do so and so,
let's do it,
and then you do it, but there are no analytical foundations
to guide,
you know, what you're doing. So the role of the bank is to support that. That's why, for example, countries like China and India, even though they have relatively more wealth, I mean, in the case of China, they have real wealth, they still come to the bank to borrow. Because when they borrow from the bank, it's not to borrow because they are borrowing money, it's because of the knowledge and that goes with it, the expertise that goes with it. They really look to that. And when China decided to get into a market orientation for its economy, that's when it began to grow. In 79. And from that 79 for the next 30 years, I was they invited both the president of the bank as well as myself to something they call 30 years of partnership with the World Bank, a celebration of results. You know, because they were saying that in those early days for the 30 years that the bank's support in financing, in policy advisory, in building institutions, in providing expertise, supported them, complemented their effort to enable them have the kind of growth that they have achieved. You know, growing in double digits in a consistent way for 2 decades is not, for 30 years is not a joke. You know, so that's what we do with the African countries. It's been a rewarding experience for me because I have watched in the last 5 years the better performance of a number of the African economies. Actually,
Botswana comes to mind.
Yes,
Botswana.
yes. Many of the countries, you know, even beyond Botswana, even countries fragile. Yes, even countries coming out of fragility, Mozambique, you know, those kinds of even countries like Tanzania, Ghana. There's better performance. Over the last decade, African countries have pursued, really macroeconomic reforms that enabled macroeconomic stability to be achieved. You know what African economies used to be known for in the past was for runaway inflation. You know, runaway inflation. You would see inflation as high as 36%. But over the last decade, many countries went on a prudent fiscal path, and then basically reformed their exchange rate regimes and brought stability. Macroeconomic stability is a prerequisite condition for growth. If you haven't achieved it for growth, for economic growth and development, if you haven't achieved it, you haven't even stood a chance of growing.
I'm not even started.
Yeah. So that macroeconomic stability, once Africa was able to achieve it, what we then saw was that Africa moved from growth levels of 2.3% or even minus 2.3% that used to be the case, to begin to grow at an average of 5.7% annually.
Which is a lot.
Which is a lot, because when it was growing at 2.3%, it was growing at below the rate of population growth. Population growth in Africa is about 3%. So if a country is growing at 2.3%, it is actually negative growth.
Every year.
It is negative growth. So this reversal of fortune positively for Africa, you know, coincided with the period that I also have been working at the bank, and that gives me a lot of joy, because my leadership has really been about getting African economies to understanding that there are no different set of rules and laws that will make Africa grow. There are fundamental economic fundamentals which if Africa paid attention to them, sustained them, just like Singapore or Malaysia or South Korea did, or Hong Kong, you know, countries that were at the same stage of development as themselves a few decades ago, they also can grow. And a number of the leaders on the continent have been very, very good in listening to the counsel that one has been able to provide together with my team. And many of the countries have improved the business environment more than used to be the case. You know, country like Rwanda has been one of the top 10 reforming countries in the doing business study of the World Bank, year in, year out, in the last 3 years now. You know, that makes a difference, because then their own citizens can invest when the business environment is clement, is conducive. You know, you have countries like Mozambique that came out of war, you know, by focusing on important reforms. They were able to move from a state of fragility to emergency, and then they began to focus on development. Now they are really focused on inclusive growth that can be beneficial to a larger number of the citizens. So I enjoy, you know, working with these countries, seeing them take and it's really about leadership at the end of the day, and it's about the vision